Yes, welcome into the camp. We are back. The Badgers are back on the field Monday morning for the sixth time of fall camp, we think. They may have been on the field yesterday. I don't know. Did something out there. But we were back in Platteville for the start of week 2 of Badgers camp. And I think, Jesse, both of us would agree that it was a good day for Tyler Van Dyke in the passing game.
Yes, I would happen to agree with that as well. And I think Badgers fans may hear that and breathe a bit of a sigh of relief after the conversation we've had about neither quarterback kind of starting to emerge. But good day for Tyler.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll also get into some big runs from the backfield and not just Tui Walker this time. Also got a glimpse of some break explosiveness, I'll say, from Dilin Jones as well. A couple defenders stood out too. The Badgers also picked up a commitment. Luke Fickell tweeting from the field, of course, Jesse.
Incredible versatility, tremendous versatility for him to send out the back signal in the middle of practice.
Always impressed with his ability to get that tweet off whenever he needs to, whether he's in a press conference, on the field coaching. Dude's versatile. So we'll get into all of that. Before we do, Homefield is back as the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They are obviously the best when it comes to getting that vintage college gear that you're looking for. And they're back in a big way with their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. It includes these platinum football boxes that have 3 never-before-seen Badger items you can't get anywhere else. They're actually debuting these, or I should say unveiling these this week. I know they unveiled some today. They're going to be unveiling the next group of them tomorrow and into Wednesday. They go on sale on Friday. They also include a hat, these core collection socks, a koozie, and then this platinum pass that gives you early access to future releases. The boxes go on sale Friday morning. They are going to sell out. You can get a 15% off your purchase using the promo code Bucky24. You can find more information up on homefield.com. But all right, let's get to practice and Tyler Van Dyke. And, you do such a great job charting practice. I do not do as great of a job charting practice, but there were a couple of throws that stood out to me. And it started kind of from the start for Tyler Van Dyke. And I just want to go a quick pass to CJ Williams over the middle in tight coverage, which was one of the first ones that I have written down here for him. But there's a whole bunch more. And I mean, again, we were looking for a jump, and I think we saw it today.
To me, Tyler looked more confident and comfortable out there. I think we saw a little bit of this towards the second half of the spring where he emerged over the last week or two. And there's a 4-play sequence that stands out most to me, and they were kind of rotating a handful of snaps just for people watching and listening. The way they set it up is not a full-on move the ball situation in some of these instances. So they might put the ball at their own 26 and then their own 31 and then their own 36. So just because you throw a 20-yard pass doesn't mean that's how they mark it, just so people can get an idea of what it is that we were watching. But he completed 4 straight passes, and a couple of them required him to roll out of the pocket, get on the move a little bit, and deliver an accurate strike. And that's what he did. There's one down the right sideline to Bryson Green that comes to mind. There's another one that went for a lengthy gain over the middle to Tretch Kekahuna. And like we've said, Kekahuna, when he gets the ball in his hands, can make something happen. But that's only one snippet. I think of another instance later where he threw a ball down the right sideline again to Green, and Green kind of had to lower his hands toward the ground to catch it, but it was really in the perfect spot between 2 defenders. And I think that's something that has definitely stood out in general about Tyler. When we were talking after practice to the cornerbacks, Nazir Forkurian said one of the things that's the biggest challenge in trying to defend Van Dyke is the way that he can throw the ball in the only place where the receiver can get it. So the corner may feel like he's in good position, but all of a sudden Van Dyke has zipped a ball past them, and now the wide receiver has caught a pass. And I think that's one of the things that can allow Tyler to stand out here. And so I think today was an important day for Tyler to try and start to create some separation on Braden Locke, because we really hadn't seen that through the first 5 practices.
Yeah, the one that you're mentioning about Tretch, he stepped up in the pocket and away from some pressure that was around his feet, stepped up and just launched one over the middle to Tretch. The one that he kind of got Bryson Green down to the ground like that, it was between 2 guys. I mean, he had the pump. It was kind of a pump and go for Bryson. They pumped, got the corner, and then he hit him between the corner and the safety. So they were on target today for the most part. Now, it could have been an even better day for him. There were a couple throws down the field that I'm sure one or either him or the receiver would like to have back, whether whether it was just a little bit too far, or maybe the receiver didn't run the entire route. Like there were a couple there that there were some big shots there that if they had been just a little bit more on the same page would have been huge. But what do you think this does to this competition? Because we talked about it on Saturday that Luke Fickell, he said, over the next few days, I don't want to overreact to anything, but in the next few days, maybe we'll have this settled.
I think you and I have both said from the outset that we thought this would be Tyler Van Dyke's job ultimately, and they didn't bring him in here with 1 year left with his history and experience to sit on the bench unless it was going to be so obvious that Braden Locke was far and away superior to Van Dyke, and that's not what we've seen. So to me, it's kind of felt like a matter of time until Tyler started to develop more of a rhythm, and they're still rotating, but I did think it was interesting later in practice, they did this third down situational drill where they just went for one play. First team offense, second team offense. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think Tyler pretty much handled the ones and Braden handled the twos. Now that may be different in the next practice, but Luke has said that he would like to figure this out sooner rather than later. And it's up to the players to try and show why they deserve to be number one or number two. But I think today is a step in the right direction for Tyler, though obviously nothing yet fully set in stone, given how many more practices they have left.
Bunch of practices left. Certainly, no doubt. But again, this was, I think, clearly his best day. And now you have to kind of stack them. Stack success. Is that what we're talking about? Is trying to stack successes? I think that was a Mike McCarthy thing back in the day with the Packers. Stack success. But I think that is the case because you go look back in the spring, he certainly did that towards the back half of the 15 practices that we saw. And it was right around the midway point of, I thought, of spring, maybe practice 10, 11 into the 15, where it certainly started to happen. In terms of the running game, we talked a lot about Tawee Walker. We talked a lot about Jackson Aker on Saturday, and Tawee Walker had another big run. Also had a fumble today, so it certainly hasn't been just all rainbows and butterflies for him, but he also had another long run. But the run that certainly stands out is I think you said 70. I know it was 60 plus, whatever it ended up being. It was a hell of a run by Dilin Jones against the second team defense.
This was the best we've seen of Dilin Jones so far early this preseason. I know I've spent some time earlier this camp talking about Darian Dupree and the versatility that he has and really the upside, but certainly shouldn't forget about Dilin Jones. Both those guys incredibly highly rated 4-star prospects. And Lucas said even back in December during the early signing period when they had signing day that both those guys would have an opportunity to come in and compete. And you can see why. Obviously, Dupree has a lot of quickness and shiftiness, and he had a couple really nice moves. Again, the ability for him to, when it appears he is dead to rights and a defender has him, just get out of it and turn something into nothing or into a big gain really stands out to me. But Jones has tremendous power and speed, and it looked to me like he was able to shake free and get clear for a situation where he would not have been tackled. And he ran all the way down the field inside the 10. I think Ricardo Hallman finally got him and I assume would have tackled him, but that was 70 plus yards beyond where the line of scrimmage was. And then obviously the offense ran its next play inside the 10. So those two guys are giving Wisconsin a real look here, and Devin Spalding's got to figure out how do we utilize those two backs or do we utilize them this season. But it's a really good problem to have for the Badgers, and those guys in just a week's time have shown why they have an opportunity to be special here.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great run. The thing you mentioned about Darian Dupree, and I wrote this down, his jump cut through traffic, it just feels so natural. And it's just so smooth, but they both have that smoothness to their game. And I think they just have a lot of options this year that they didn't have last year. And I know we talked about it, but when Ches went down and then Braylon was dinged up, you didn't have anybody you could turn to and just still feel good about. And right now I think you do. Obviously, Ches is not taking part in a lot of the team drills, being held out of those. And so it's given Tawee a lot of option or a lot of time. It's given Jackson Aker a lot of time. And then the two younger guys to go along with Cade Yakameli, and they'd even further down with Gideon Atuka. And I guess you could probably throw Bortolotti in there too. Like, guys, I don't think that you're going to give the ball to Grove Bortolotti a lot or to Gideon Atuka a lot or anything like that. But I think they have more options this year. it's a much bigger room and it's a much more versatile room that if things do happen, they have some answers for it.
Yeah, so far the reps that we're talking about with Jones and Dupree, like today, were second team reps.
Yeah.
Obviously, we
In the
didn't.
past, though, those have been third team reps, right? Like, so
Yes,
moving up.
yes, they're getting more and more opportunity. It seems like each practice, and I think the challenge is figuring out how many reps do you give to each guy to try and get an accurate evaluation and assessment of these players. And I still don't know what either of those guys' role will be with the team this season. I mean, there's a chance that just Ches and Tawee are the 1-2 and they're handling 90+% of the snaps. But there's also a chance that one of those guys is needed or is so versatile or useful that they want to try and figure out how to get them on the field. And obviously the goal is to win now, get your best personnel out there. And I think both those guys have legitimate opportunities to be contributors this season.
Yes. Now, how big of those contributions certainly remains to be seen. Going over the defensive side of the ball, and we'll talk about the corners on a bit because we got the chance to talk with Paul Haynes and hear what he thought about his group and then the players as well. I thought Jaheim Thomas really, really stood out at times in practice today. I don't know that we've talked about him a ton, but when they went to some of their three down linemen, or excuse me, their three linebacker sets, inside linebacker wise, it's a group that I think probably put some of their best players on the field along with him and Jake Chaney and then Christian Allegro as well as Taka Curtis. Those four really give them a nice look inside.
He's got a lot of versatility because he can obviously line up in the traditional inside linebacker sets, but he's got the ability to be a stand-up edge rusher in that outside linebacker mold if they need to. And there's a couple instances where you're right. He was in making a play. There's one I remember where he just shot right up through the middle and went high, and Daryl Peterson went low and just didn't allow the running back to get any yardage. But this staff knows him really well, obviously, with the history at Cincinnati. Then he goes to Arkansas and has a bunch of tackles. So I think that helps a lot. And because they have those four linebackers who can all play, and I expect them to all play, much like we're talking about with offense, you got to figure out a way to get your best players defensively on the field. And Mike Tressel certainly has shown that he's willing to adapt to the personnel that he has. And if that means putting three of those guys on the field at the same time, then so be it. But Thomas, you're right. We haven't necessarily talked a ton about him, but I expect him to be a tackle machine this season.
I would agree. All right. Going out to the corner spot. We got to talk to Paul Haynes. We got to talk to Ricardo Hallman and Nazir Forkarine and RJ Delancey after practice today. And Paul Haynes was asked about his group. And it's a group kind of like in other places on this team that is in a much better place this time around this year, where you have so many different guys that you could potentially throw in there. We talk about the starters, the three guys we got to talk to today, or not the starters, but the three guys that you have experience in Nazir Forkarine and RJ Delancey and Ricardo Hallman. But even past that, with some of the younger guys and Amari Snowden and Jonas Duclona and Jace Arnold and maybe even Xavier Lucas, that group as a whole, Paul Haynes feels better about it. And I'm not even talking about the slots right now. We'll get into that. But just that group of corners that you could throw out there, they aren't. Jonas Duclona and Jace Arnold aren't true freshmen anymore. RJ Delancey has extensive experience, and then we know what Nazir Forkarine has done this offseason, and we know what Ricardo Hallman did last year.
Paul Haynes said he feels like he has six guys that he could throw out there. You kind of hear some stuff like this at every position group in a lot of seasons. Oh, there's more depth, there's more talent, but it definitely feels that way at cornerback. We know what the top group is going to look like. It was Ricardo Hallman, Nazir Forkarine, and presumably Max Lofi in the slot. Now, depending on the circumstance, they obviously could put Austin Brown there, but Lofi has handled the bulk of the one slot reps because then Brown is back at safety with Hunter Wohler. But the two young guys, Jace Arnold and Jonas Duclona, have really had good moments. I think Arnold, to me, has stood out the most among the young guys. They throw him in there. He has no fear. It doesn't matter who he's going against. And he has had a few different instances where he's just broken up a pass or he's been in the right area to make it tough for the wide receiver and it falls incomplete, even if it isn't necessarily a PBU. We talked about Amari Snowden coming up with a big pick in the red zone on Saturday. I think the further he gets away from focusing on two sports, being a baseball standout in high school, the better that he is as a cornerback. And he has that unique skill set because of how tall he is. And so Haynes had a lot of praise for him as well. Doesn't necessarily you're going to see all of them on the field this season, but you just keep looking at those last couple of recruiting classes and thinking those guys are going to be on the field at some point here.
Yeah. Again, Xavier Lucas is not among those 6, right? Not right now, not yet, but physically and ability wise, he certainly has all those traits, and he has a little bit of has some swagger to him as well. He's another one of those South Florida kids. And I asked RJ Delancey what makes South Florida guys different. Or I said, first of all, I asked him if South Florida guys were different. He said, he laughed a little bit too long, I think. And then, and said yes. And then what makes them different? Just attitude and the fact that they fought through adversity to get where they are. And it's just a little bit of a different environment that they grew up in down there in South Florida and the type of competition that they go up against. But yeah, so I think he's going to help them at some point. But going back to the starting group, Ricardo Hallman's coming off a pretty serious offseason surgery to fix a shoulder issue that he said impacted his ability physically and to be more physical and to bring tackling wise. And he was a little hesitant to throw his shoulder into places, and he's not that way anymore. And I think he's able to play a little bit more free.
Yeah. And Paul even mentioned afterward that it takes that first hit. And first time you realize your shoulder got popped and you're okay, to have the confidence to go out there. But he thinks that Rico is even a little bit better now, just as an overall player to where he was last season. I don't know whether that means he's going to have another 7 interception season. Sometimes you have to take advantage of those opportunities. And now that the film is out there, you wonder how often they're going to want to test him, even if he is undersized, going up against some of those wide receivers. But I expect him to have another really good season. And I think you got to feel pretty good about that top group on the outside, given what Forkerine has done in the last year and the progress that he's made, gaining 20 plus pounds and recovering from the thoracic outlet syndrome that he had when a year ago he couldn't even lift weights with this team. He's come a long, long way. So him and Hallman, I think, should be pretty solid on the outside as a top duo.
Asked Hallman if he had that moment yet with that hit, has he been able to try that shoulder out. He said, yeah, that Tywee hit is what where his helmet got popped off, because when Tywee came around the corner. So he was laughing, but he's like, yeah, now I feel after that one, I feel good about it. I feel really good about where I am physically, and I'm willing to stick my head and shoulder into what I believe he called a bowling ball that is Tywee Walker when he gets going. So you mentioned Forkerine. There were times at the end of last year where he was just run down. I know that's what Paul Haynes said, and he agreed with that. Like, he physically was run down. He was dealing with an ankle injury after the Rutgers game, and so he just wasn't physically there. But I thought he actually kind of played well. Maybe not in the bowl game. That's a tough situation against those guys, against the LSU receivers and the passing game that they were doing it. But certainly against Minnesota, he had some big plays against Minnesota. And I know when we talked to Luke Fickell in the spring, said he was the most guy who had taken the biggest jump from where he was at the end of the year to that point. And I think that's continued. But 20 pounds and running faster, 20 pounds heavier and running faster, that doesn't normally happen, especially with a senior going into his last year of college football.
Well, his circumstance was so unique, too. He comes from the Division II program with Grand Valley State. Matt Mitchell has intimate knowledge of his ability. But then he has that situation where he can't really lift weights, and he's coming into the season not where he would want to be, and yet still ends up playing a ton of snaps, which I don't know. It didn't work out the way that I thought it would in terms of like who would get the most snaps. But then all of a sudden he's starting, and now he's just better positioned to be able to hold up over the course of a season. And so, a lot of progress we've seen out of him.
Look, every one of us thought Alexander Smith was going to be their best corner last year. Right?
Yeah, he had so much experience, and then Forkerine kind of just started taking the reps away.
Yeah, obviously Smith was not. It wasn't great. He didn't have the year that he wanted to have. Jason Maitre was a solid player in the slot, but they're going to be bigger, certainly bigger there, and I think that's probably what Mike Tressel wants in his defense, whether it's Max Lofi and his corner ability, but also the ability to work at safety. And then certainly Austin Brown is a much bigger slot who has the not the history, but the experience of playing that in the bowl game. And those are their top two guys. And then past that, it sounds like obviously safety bodies in Owen Arnett and Justin Taylor.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I mean, Paul also said that, and I think last year was a pretty good example of it. All you need really is one guy in the slot. Generally, if you're in a good position, because you can just throw them out there for every play, and so it's better. But this year, that's not the case. They have multiple players, and so they've got more opportunity now. I say that, or he says that, and until someone gets hurt, and then you really need to figure out the depth. But I think I would expect it to be Lofi, and then in certain situations Brown, and I wouldn't expect necessarily to see other guys out there, unless it's absolutely necessary.
I do still find it not funny, but interesting that they have not used RJ Delancey in there at all, despite his experience playing that spot, previously. And it's just, I mean, it's a bit surprising that we all thought that was going to be his spot when he came in, and didn't work there in the spring and hasn't worked there at all in fall camp.
So yeah, Haynes was asked about this in the spring, and he said when they evaluated him, they saw him on the outside all the way because he liked the tape and the way that he went stride for stride with some of these big dudes. Because Toledo plays good competition, especially in non-conference, and so all the way they viewed him as a guy who could play on the outside, even though he did play in the slot at Toledo. I thought that was kind of an interesting answer from him back in the spring.
Yeah, for sure. So Wisconsin's defense, I thought James Thompson Jr. had a nice day today as well. Just going through some of my other notes here. Dilin Johnson got some second team reps and got a pressure on Locke. So he might be moving up a little bit. Jamel Howard, third team, had a nice little pressure there against Mabry Matoyer. So defensive lineman kind of starting to maybe show up a little bit. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, we're seeing a handful of plays from some of those younger guys. It's just, will it translate into a spot on the depth chart where you're getting consistent reps? It's hard to say right now, but I've said before, I just like a lot of what they have in the younger guys, even if you're not going to see them on the field consistently this season.
All right, so Wisconsin also in the middle of practice today landed a commitment in the class of 2025. I'm going to try the name. I'm going to make that effort here. But Xavier Yekponu, is that a good effort or no, Jesse?
Sure.
All right. So they land the big defensive lineman, over 300 pounds. What do we know about X as is on his Twitter account?
Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to go about it. Well,
from now on, I introduced him as that. He's going with X the rest of the way.
I mean, this gives Wisconsin 22 hard commits, 23 if you count the kicker that they have from in-state. So I would think they're pretty well done in 2025. But this is one that they had to stave off a lot of different schools. He took official visits to, I think, 4 schools, and obviously saw Wisconsin's coming back up in September. LSU was a school that he visited. I know Oklahoma State was as well. But this gives Wisconsin 3 defensive linemen in this class when not all that long ago in the summer, they didn't have any. He's obviously a big body who can move some dudes up front. You always wonder how that's going to translate. But with him, Wilnerson Telemak, and Torin Petaway, the kid from Middleton, all of a sudden they've got what feels like a pretty strong defensive line class as they start to stack these pieces when they had 3 guys that signed in 2024 and then Jamel Howard in 2023. So there's, again, a lot to like about the young defensive linemen that they either already have or will be bringing in soon.
Well, we talked about it the other day, right, with some of the young, when it was Ernest Weller and Dilin Johnson and Jamel Howard working with that third team. It was like, that's kind of going to be the future of it. This is another guy that projects as in that same fold.
Yep. And getting him out of Texas too, which is not always easy, especially with the offers that he had, I think is, an important step for them to show that they can go and recruit anywhere and get guys who have offers from some other major programs. But someone who's somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 pounds at this point, you can see on the tape is a big boy.
Yeah, definitely is. Definitely is. And are they, but I mean, we've said this a couple of times. Are they done now? Are they done in 25?
I mean, if I just look at what the positions of need are, I feel like they addressed them over the last couple months. I know did a story in the summer about what was left on the big board, and then they went and got those guys. They got the big-bodied wide receiver on the outside with Eugene Hilton Jr. They obviously got defensive linemen. They got Mason Posa, and they added pieces that they could have been okay with, but then went and got like even a Hardy Watts, a fifth offensive lineman. So I'll never say never, because this staff has shown they're going to continue to stack talent. And if that means over recruiting who they already have for somebody better, they will do that. At the same time, you have to be mindful of how many spots you actually have. And right now, they're in that range that Luke Fickell has talked about in terms of the number of high school prospects they want to bring in every class.
Do you think that changes now? Because the roster changes, I should say the roster number changes, where it's going to be an overall decline in number of players on a team that is allowed, but you're able to give scholarships to everybody. Does that number increase?
This is a really fascinating talking point that I think we won't know for a couple of years. My initial response is I would think that you would have a higher volume of scholarship players that you are bringing in, because the alternative is you keep doing the same thing, but then make the guys who were fringe scholarship guys or walk-on guys, put them on scholarship. Because if the number of scholarships increases from 85 to 105, well, where do those extra 20 come from? Even though your roster is shrinking, it's a decision that every coaching staff has to make. I do think, though, that even though we're in a transfer portal era and we're going to continue to see guys leave the program, they'll probably get somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 transfers every year. I don't think Luke is blowing smoke when he says he wants to be a developmental program. It's just that it's harder than ever to do that. But by that, I think he means he wants to continue to bring in a high number of high school prospects. So I think we'll continue to see 20 plus high school kids, but every program and every year is going to be different, because you've got to evaluate the needs that you have at each position.
We talk about the fringe kids that could potentially be getting offers at Wisconsin. I'm wondering how this impacts some of the guys that are end up being some of Wisconsin's better recruits that have offers from some bigger schools that aren't necessarily committable. And I'm putting committable in air quotes, because they have offers, but do they really have offers? If they can't commit, are there really offers? But when you're able to add 20 more guys, those offers, you would think, become committable. And you just wonder if maybe some of the guys that are, I'm not talking about this particular class or even last class, but in the history of Wisconsin, and it's probably something that a research project that I don't necessarily have time for right now, but would love to go and do, is like the fringe guys that ended up having those offers from other places but not committable, end up coming to Wisconsin, and like, what do they do when they come to Wisconsin? And if you don't have those guys because those offers are now committable to some of the bigger programs, how does that impact the flow down for Wisconsin? Because you go back to the early or the late the 80s, when you could stack, all those scholarship players, and so much is different now with the transfer portal and all that. But what does it hurt to bring those guys now? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't hurt the bigger program or the higher, whatever tier program you want to say, bring them on. If they don't work, they transfer. Who cares? And I just wonder how that impacts maybe a program that is just a step down from some of the blue bloods of the sport.
It's going to come down to a lot of what recruiting comes down to, the message that you deliver, the relationships, and the opportunity that you can provide, and what the fit looks like, because that could be part of the message is, hey, you are our priority. You come in here and you're going to have a chance to play right away, as opposed to, are you just going to be a guy somewhere else, or you're number 10? Now, people might not think that way as a recruit. I don't know. It just depends on a lot of different factors, but that's certainly going to be part of this too. If the Ohio States of the world, or Michigans, or whatever else is out there suddenly has X number of additional scholarships in a class, you're going to be fighting for your top dogs against those schools, perhaps even more so than you already have been.
I mean, there were reports out there of Xavier Lucas, right? Like in Florida State, and how that was an offer. And again, I do not follow this as closely as like the guys that do it for a living, where it's every single day type of stuff. But based on the reports around Xavier Lucas, like Florida State, that offer wasn't necessarily committable for him, even though that's kind of where he wanted, like that was kind of the dream school. And again, I don't want to get into all that stuff, but maybe next year that offer is, and he's at Florida State right now.
It's every year there's something different, and this is going to be something that we're going to have to be monitoring, because I think it's going to change a lot about how you approach your big board, what your numbers look like, and who you're matching up with when it comes to other schools and their offers.
Yeah. Again, I think Xavier Lucas is a huge get for Wisconsin, and I'm not saying that it would be different. I'm just saying I wonder if that would have throws another wrench into it. And we'll see. Again, we'll see going forward how exactly it all looks for Wisconsin. I think they're going to continue to be a program based on the way that they've recruited these first 2 years is going to be right in that 20 to 25 range of on a year-to-year basis, not in terms of recruits, but in terms of where they're ranked in that. And the transfer portal is going to continue to be a big part of it because that's just the way that college football is. And I know there's some schools like Colorado or a couple others that are just focused not exclusively on the transfer portal, but very heavily on the transfer portal. And we'll see whether that whether that works out for them or not. But I don't think you can strictly be a transfer portal school or strictly a high school, school. You have to blend both if you're going to have success, because you need to fill holes on a yearly basis, but you still need to have that infusion of talent.
Yeah, if you go all in on
ranks.
one, if you go all in on one, you risk losing out on a number of guys, and so it's a delicate balance, and every staff has to do it a little bit differently. But this is part of the changing landscape of college football, and it keeps it interesting.
Definitely does. All right, Wisconsin back on the field tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, and we'll be back tomorrow afternoon to break it all down and whatever else is on the docket. So, Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.